Now, what's happened with ancient women, especially the stories from the epics and the Purans, they have been treated as victims mostly by the popular media, by today's forwards. You have forwards in every social media, and a lot of them don't really know what they're talking about. And, and unfortunately, by a lot of fictional accounts too, women have tended to be seen as victims in a dominantly male society with not much agency of their own. Even the warriors pray to the goddess, not so much to gods. So this whole concept of women being powerful, of women being able to stand on their own feet, of women determining things rather than going along with somebody else's decision. So this whole concept of Shakti, I feel, has been my inheritance and every Indian's inheritance through mothers, grandmothers, and ancestors whom you don't even know about, but it's come down to us. So we are inherited. And I discovered there are a lot of powerful women in the not only Vedas, epics, Puranas, and history too. And that for me was quite surprising because this is not brought out anywhere. I mean, most people don't talk about it. We know one or two. We know the Rani of Jhansi. We don't know any others. If you ask somebody, a casual person, they really don't know. They don't understand these things. So what I found there was quite a surprise. See, because of the Shakti tradition, the goddess has always been a very powerful figure in India. So the result is that women have always had a matriarchal role in every Indian household, in every Indian society. Mothers are on top of the tree. I mean, mothers are considered higher than everybody else.
Namaste, ladies and gentlemen. I am Ojasvi Mishra, welcoming you to a new series where we wish to define Indic feminism, one which recognizes the role of women beyond family but refuses to promote hyperautonomy among individuals such that societal constructs necessary for the health and longevity of a society like family, marriage, and parenthood do not collapse. This new initiative taken on Indic Talks, Center for Indic Studies, is called Sitaism, a way to proliferate Indian models of inspiration to explore the feminine infinitude. In this episode of the series, we have with us Rohini Gupta ji, a writer, editor, and teacher in Mumbai. About 20 of her books can be found on Amazon, and she blogs at Word Skies on WordPress. The title of the talk today is Real Women of Epic India. The speaker will talk about how women of ancient times have been misunderstood and what she discovered while reading the original texts through the character of Chitrangada and more. Ma'am, I welcome you and I request you to take over the reins.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me here. I think what I want to talk about today is one, the misunderstandings about women in the past, and secondly, what I have discovered about it. Now, what's happened with ancient women, especially the stories from the epics and the Purans, they have been treated as victims mostly by the popular media, by today's forwards. You have forwards in every social media, and a lot of them don't really know what they're talking about. And, and unfortunately, by a lot of fictional accounts too, women have tended to be seen as victims in a dominantly male society with not much agency of their own. And I also thought that for a long time until I started reading the original text. And once I came to the original text, then I discovered it was not quite the way it was. And the whole journey, I think, began there. Because when I was in college, I went through a feminist phase. I read all the feminists, it was all the rage there. Everybody was going on morchas and this, that, and the other. So I also went through a feminist phase. And I read all the feminist books, out of which only one book stayed with me because the others didn't seem to apply to the Indian scenario at all. They were talking about a Western model in a Western world. So it didn't really fit with me as an Indian girl. in an Indian city, right? But one book was written by a writer called Virginia Woolf. She wrote this little lecture called A Room of My Own, A Room of Her Own, in which she talked about how women need to be given agency in this world. She was writing in a time when women didn't even go to university. They were restricted. They couldn't even walk in a university campus without restrictions. So the book she wrote, one part of it really stayed with me. She was saying that throughout history, so many fathers have left huge estates for their sons. They've given kingdoms to their sons, they've given businesses to their sons, they've given estates to their sons. But where are the mothers who've given it to their daughters? That's completely lacking throughout most of history, that or recorded history. It may have happened, but we don't know about it. So thinking about that, it made sense to me that in India, I have been given this heritage through my mothers and grandmothers. And that is the concept of Shakti. Because nowhere in the world has there been a tradition where women are actually seen as power, power incarnate. The whole definition of Shakti is power incarnate. And even the warriors pray to the goddess, not so much to gods. So this whole concept of women being powerful, of women being able to stand on their own feet, of women determining things rather than going along with somebody else's decision. So this whole concept of Shakti, I feel, has been my inheritance and every Indian's inheritance through mothers, grandmothers, and ancestors whom you don't even know about, but it's come down to us. So we are inheriting. So now talking about the women in history, there are a lot of women mentioned in all the old texts. There are a lot of women mentioned in the epics, all the epics. There are a lot of women mentioned in the Puranas, whole texts are about them. There's a really ancient text called the Yoga Vashisht, which has some very powerful women in it. So there's a lot of women's stories in the old texts. But because they've come down to us through translations, and some not very good translations, unfortunately, things have got a little corrupted somewhere. And I think a lot of the original translations were Western, Indologist, those kind of translations. They didn't have a grasp of Indian society. They may have understood the Sanskrit language, but they did not have a grasp of Indian society at all. So they didn't really understand what they were reading, though they read the original Sanskrit. And they mistranslated some very key concepts. Like, for example, I think a word like Dharma has never really been translated properly. Even worse than that is a word like yajna, which has been translated as sacrifice when it's not that at all. So, so much mistranslation has happened that it's not surprising that the women's stories have also got a bit mistranslated. So at the point where I started reading the originals, and I started the originals checking the Sanskrit verses, and that is when I realized that even some of the translators are not exactly saying what I think the originals would have said. And I discovered there are a lot of powerful women in the not only Vedas, epics, Puranas, and history too. And that for me was quite surprising because this is not brought out anywhere. I mean, most people don't talk about it. We know one or two. We know the Rani of Jhansi. We don't know any others. If you ask somebody, a casual person, they really don't know. They don't understand these things. So what I found there was quite a surprise. See, because of the Shakti tradition, the goddess has always been a very powerful figure in India. So the result is that women have always had a matriarchal role in every Indian household, in every Indian society. Mothers are on top of the tree. I mean, mothers are considered higher than everybody else. So what happens with this is that the kind of children who grow up with a powerful mother figure, who grew up with a powerful grandmother figure, who grew up with aunts and all kinds of powerful women around them, they're not the ones who will go and disrespect women later. They are less likely, let's say. They're less likely to do that than if you're coming from a country where there is no Shakti figure at all. where women are never seen in a powerful role. Right? So I think that made the very big difference. Now let's talk about the epics. In the epics, there's so many stories of women, and in almost every case, these are not women who take it quietly when things go wrong. They speak their mind. They tell everybody exactly what they think. And in some cases, they change the course of everything by speaking up. Now, that is not the picture of a victim, at least as far as I can tell. Let me give you a couple of examples in this. In the oldest text we have, which is the Rig Veda, whose date is completely unknown, and I would say somewhere 10,000 or something like that. There are disputes about the date. I'm not going into that. But it's a very old text. It's considered the most ancient and most sacred of all our texts. So today, if you're a Hindu, you pay reverence to the Vedas, even if you don't read it. Nobody reads it. But in theory, at least you pay reverence to the Vedas, right? Now, in the Vedas, there are at least 30 female rishis who have contributed hymns, who have contributed riks, which are the stotras of the Vedas. Now, the Vedas is a compilation of different stotras from different rishis. So somebody has put together all these stotras together and made the Vedas. And in the Mahabharata times, Ved Vyas put these in order. So what he created was the mandalas. There are 10 mandalas in the Vedas. He put them by families. So Vishwamitra and his lineage is one mandala. Vashishta and his lineage is another mandala. And so on. Angiras, so on. All the rishis, their disciples, their lineages got a mandala. Now in the most sacred of all texts, we have 30 women writing. Now if you think of this as an anthology, if I say I want to do an anthology and I put out the word and say, please send me stories for the anthology, I will get 3,000 entries. Could be. Out of that, I'll choose 10, 15. So if you take the Vedas as a collection for 30 women to be chosen, how many must have been meditating, studying, writing, thinking, doing all of that? There was a huge ecosystem of women in the ancient days. There were ashrams, there were gurukuls. The old education, Indians, even today, education is the big deal. Everything goes by education. The first thing parents want their kids is good education. Everything else can wait. They'll spend all their money, but they will get them a good education. This has not changed. 10,000 years ago, it was exactly the same in the Rigvedic time, except that in those days, education was free. There were gurukuls everywhere. Almost every village would have a gurukul. There'd be big universities everywhere. Takshashila was a Mahabharata age university. And Vyasa's universities would have had thousands of students, universities of him and his disciples. And everybody learned. So out of that, a lot of women also learned. And that is how you've got really strong women. A woman who is taught, who's educated, who thinks for herself, is not going to be pushed around. She's not going to be a victim. That makes all the difference. The education also. One thing, not having a strong female figure. And the second thing is the education. Education makes a huge, big difference. Now, there were many women who were rishis in their own right. Some very famous debates have come down to us, like the debate of Yajnavalkya and Gargi. Both were rishis, both were equal, and they had a very respectful and very polite discussion on very esoteric philosophical subjects. It's from one of the, I forget which Upanishad, it's from one of the Upanishads, right? And this debate was in open court with hundreds of rishis around witnessing and watching and listening to this debate. That story, by the way, is there in the book Aryaa, the story of Gargi and Yajnavalkya. So if anyone wants to read it, please read that story. You'll get the full idea. So like that, there were a lot of women rishis who had their say, who spoke, they were listened to. They may have even taught in the universities. I don't know, we don't have the records, but it's very likely. That was one aspect. Women as teachers, women as rishis, women at a very highly educated level, nothing less than the highest in the male, right? The other aspect was women as warriors. There are loads of women as warriors. I know that, we are not taught this at all. We somehow think that there were Amazons in Greece. Amazons in Greece were not one half of what we had in India and still have in India, right? They're warriors, women warriors today, they're women warriors then. Let's look at some of the women warriors. There are endless stories in the epics. In the Ramayana, one of the powerful women warriors was Ram's stepmother, Kaikeyi. Kaikeyi was a warrior. She fought with Dashrath in many battles. She drove his chariot for him in many ways. In one of those battles, she saved her husband's life and she drove him. He was wounded and she went and rescued him and she drove him out of the battle and took him to safety. And for that, for saving his life, Dashrath said, "You can ask me whatever you want and I will fulfill any wish you have." That's the wish she used later to send Ram into exile. I'm not going into that story because there are more complications there. But I'm just telling you the point that she was a very powerful warrior who even saved Dashrath's life at one point. She was not the only one. Arjun, on one of his campaigns, I think this was a campaign he took from Indraprastha. They used to do these Digvijays to go and collect tribute. So from Indraprastha, he went north, taking his army to collect tribute. The rule is generally that you ask every kingdom you pass either to pay you tribute or you fight them. Now, one kingdom was impossible for him because it was a walled kingdom in the north. We don't exactly know where it was. It was a kingdom completely surrounded by walls. The problem was it was ruled by women, and the women were in charge over there. And Arjun was a man, and his army were men, and they couldn't even enter. So Arjun, of course, being a respectful Arya from those days, he camped outside, and I don't know how they got through, but finally the women inside that kingdom sent a man outside as a messenger, and then they had their little parley, and tribute was sent to him, and he left without ever entering that kingdom. But that's the kind of kingdoms we had in ancient India. This was a completely female kingdom. Men weren't allowed to enter, and he didn't even try. And none of his army could go because they're all male too. So you can imagine. And the rather powerful women from the epics and Puranas too. Okay, this one is from the Puranas. The Lalita, Devi Lalita, the goddess Lalita. The details from the Puran, I think it's the Markandeya Puran. I could be wrong in that, could be one of the others. Don't remember exactly. There's an entire section describing Lalita, and she lives in a city of women again. Hers is a truly Amazonian city in those times. She rules, she is the queen, she rules, her palace is in the center. She has two very powerful women around her. There is Mantrini, who's the minister, who is the executive arm, and she does all the organizing and looking after the kingdom and all of that. And there is Dandini. Dandini is the judge, the policeman, she's the enforcing arm. So with these two women, she rules that entire kingdom. She has a very powerful army consisting solely of women, solely. There are no men. It's an entirely powerful army of women. There are men in the kingdom, but they are not in the army. And it's very clear from the stories that this warrior culture was ingrained in women from a very, very early age. They were bred to be warriors. And how do we know this? Because there's a story of Lalita's young daughter who's 12 years old. And they're not supposed to fight until 16. 16 was the Kshatriya age of maturity when you could fight in a battle. So this girl is 12 years old. She sneaks onto the battlefield and somehow she gets into the battle and she goes and fights this male army and she wins decisively. So that's how we know that even 12-year-old girls were deep in the Kshatriya culture of being a warrior. and they were bred for it. I mean, they were trained and heavily trained so they could actually go out on a battlefield and win against an adult army, which is quite something, right? So we know that this warrior culture was ingrained in the past. How do we know whether it was carried on later? There are stories here also. Now, Lalita's age would have definitely been BC, maybe 3000, 4000, 5000 BCE. I don't know. The age is not sure. We do know the age of the Mauryas. It's around 3022 BCE when Chandragupta Maurya became the emperor. He overthrew the Nanda king, Dhanananda. This was in Magadha, which is today's Bihar and that area. And he took over the kingdom. And it was one of the most powerful kingdoms in the country. Magadha was a kingdom which had an insane amount of army. It had elephants, like 50,000 elephants or some crazy numbers. They were one of the biggest and richest. And Chandragupta now was ruling that army. But he had a lot of enemies. And he didn't really trust the male warriors because he said that how do I know that one of these male warriors is not working for my enemy? So he had this entire bodyguard, which was all female. They were extremely highly trained. They were extremely powerful and deadly, and they were all women. And he had this very highly trained bodyguard who stayed with him 24 hours, in turns. And that was what kept him safe through all those tumultuous years. Now, he was created a king by his guru, Acharya Chanakya, whom, of course, we all know because of the Arthashastra. But Acharya Chanakya was a very far-sighted guru, and when he was ruling the kingdom for Chandragupta, he was in charge of the actual ruling of the kingdom while Chandragupta was the king, right? So he had created one of the deadliest forces in the world. And I don't know if this has ever been rivaled anywhere. He had created a completely deadly, so much so that the very name would send shivers down everybody's spine in those days. And they were spies, they were assassins, and they were peerless warriors. So it was very hard to take these people on, and they were entirely women. They were called Vishkanyas, and these people, which Chanakya had created, the whole force was funded by him, were one of the most fearsome armies in the world. Now, why is nobody talking about that kind of force, which kept Chandragupta Maurya's kingdom safe? I don't know. The women are certainly not victims, right? So, okay, that is about the warriors. Now let's look at some of the known names from the epics. I'm looking at two. I'm looking at Sita and I'm looking at Draupadi. Because again, there's been a big mess about these two. There's been so much misinformation from people who have not actually read the epics. So I want to talk about both Sita and Draupadi. Right? Now, Sita was a strong woman. She had her own mind. She was no pushover, despite what people say. She was not at all the victim. When Ram is sent into exile, she's the one who says, I'm going. She's told you don't have to go. She says, no, I'm going. And she goes with Ram. She goes through his entire exile with him. It must be very difficult for a princess brought up in an incredibly lavish palace environment to go and live on forests and fruits and roots. And then things get worse for her because the most fearsome villain of them all, Ravan, kidnaps her. And what does she do? She doesn't break. She holds her ground. She stands for herself. She doesn't allow Ravan to touch her. Now imagine that if she had broken, what use would be Ram's war? The whole war of Ram wouldn't have been much use if Sita had broken. She did not break. She stayed tough. She stayed strong. And she came out of it. Right? So that kind of toughness is not given to everybody. Most would just crumble. It's not a joke to be kidnapped and taken to a place like Lanka where you don't know anyone, you don't speak the language, you're surrounded by Rakshasas, and every day you're getting bullied, and you hold on, and you stay strong, and you don't allow him to come anywhere near you. She did it. That's not a weak woman. Not in my books. That is absolutely not a victim. No way. She did something which very few women can possibly achieve. Right? Now, later on, there are stories of um, which a lot of women don't like, which is Sita being sent into exile when she was pregnant, and those stories. I do not know if these were actually part of the Valmiki Ramayana. It's disputed because these come from the Uttarakhand, which is the last book of the Ramayana. And today there's a dispute on whether that book was actually added later or it was part of the Valmiki Ramayana. I don't know, so I'm not going into that. Right? But even if you take that book as it is, even if you, for example, just speculatively accept that that book, okay, was part of the Ramayana, then look at the story in it. Again, Sita's pregnant, she's alone, she's left in a forest somewhere. Does she break? No, she doesn't break. She goes into Valmiki's ashram. She lives there. She brings up her sons. The sons grow up to be exemplary kids. They're loving, they're caring, they love her, they take care of her, they're excellent warriors of a kind which almost nobody has seen. They're very fast learners. Valmiki, everything he teaches them, they learn very quickly. They're quite remarkable kids. She brings up these exemplary kids. She must be an exemplary mother too, to bring up those kids in that harsh environment compared to her palace. Valmiki's ashram was very kind to her, but still, compared to her royal uh, heritage, that must have been quite a difficult environment for her. But she lives there, she brings up the kids. Then at some point, she's asked to take the fire test again. And what does she say? She doesn't say, if you please, I'll do it. Or she doesn't beg. She says, no, sorry, not doing it. And she goes to her mother's realm. Her mother is Prithvi, the goddess of the earth. And according to the legend, the earth opens up and takes her back. And that is the story of Sita. Now, which part of that is a victim? I don't see it. I'm not seeing victim anywhere in that. She is one of the toughest and strongest women around. She has brought, um, her own type of strength into the most difficult of circumstances that anyone could face, both the kidnapping and the exile, if the exile was there. And she came out of it intact. And in the end, she chose her path. She said, no, I'm not doing that. I'm going to my mother's home. So that was Sita's story. It's not exactly the tale that they tell us. Okay, let's look at an even tougher woman, Draupadi. Draupadi is a different kind of woman. Sita was quiet. She was very gentle, tough, but very gentle, very quiet, did not speak very much, acted more than spoke. Draupadi was a firebrand. Draupadi was aggressive. She was very vocal. She lost her temper quite often. Even her husbands were afraid of her temper. She kept them in check through that. There's one occasion where Arjun has gone to Dwarka, and there Subhadra is in a tough state. So it's Subhadra arranges it so that he kidnaps her supposedly from the temple, and then he marries her with Krishna's blessing, and then they escape to go back to Indraprastha, where the Pandavas are staying. But now the problem arises when Arjun arrives in Indraprastha, because now he doesn't know how to tell Draupadi this. In tradition, you had to first consult your wife before you took a second wife. And Arjun has not done that. And it's getting very hot for him. So he chickens out and he tells Subhadra, you dress up very simply and you go and manau her because I can't do it. So Subhadra goes and talks to her and peace is made that way. So you can see already that Draupadi is no pushover. She knows her mind and she can stick to it. Now let's look at the dice game, because the dice game, of course, is in every popular culture thing, in all the stories, in all the TVs, and everything possible. Uh, and Draupadi is always seen as a victim in the dice game. Now, once again, to see that she is not a victim, let's look at what actually happens in the dice game. Yes, the circumstances are difficult. She is dragged into that sabha in her uh, not fully dressed, right? But how does she go? Does she go weeping? Huh. So I was talking about Draupadi when she's dragged into the sabha by Dushyasan and the other Kauravas. Um, Notice that she does not go in there weeping. She goes in there raging. And what she does in there is not, bewail and be full of grief. She goes and asks some very tough questions, which even the Kauravas cannot answer. She asks questions like, before my husbands lost me, had they lost themselves? Which is a very strong point in any law. And she asks such tough questions that nobody can answer them. And she puts them on the spot so much so that eventually Dhritarashtra, the king, who up to then was taking a very tough stance, he finally gives in and says, okay, let's make some peace. You can ask me for any boon you want, and I will grant it to you. And she asks for her husbands to be freed, which he says, okay, we will do. And then he says, you can have a second boon. And up to this point, Draupadi does not know that they have lost the city of Indraprastha. So she does not ask for that back because she didn't know. If she had asked for that back, they would have gone home and things would have been very different. But it's because she rescues the Pandavas that everything goes well. So she should be a hero in that situation. She did not go into it as a victim. Yes, the circumstances tried to victimize her, but she is the one who went to the rescue. She came out as a hero. She rescued the Pandavas when they were in a tough state and they were unable to rescue themselves. In my books, that's a hero. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about is my story in the book Aryaa. Um, it's rare to have anthologies on this type, so I was quite happy when I heard that Arya was looking for stories about Indian women, Indian epic women. And I chose Chitrangada for two reasons. One was that I felt that her story was also very misunderstood. And secondly, I thought her story spoke to me. She seemed like a very modern woman, living with a very modern mindset, even though she was in the Mahabharata age, which would be at least 3000 BC. Right? Let's talk first about how the Chitrangada story is, I feel, misunderstood. I read the original Mahabharata. I read two translations. One is the Ganguly translation, which I go to quite a lot. And the second one is the critical edition, translated by Vivek Debroy, which you have to, of course, consult. And then there's a third edition, 10 volumes of the Mahabharata along with the Sanskrit, which I consulted when required. Right. So going through these editions, there isn't much of a story of Chitrangada in the Mahabharata. There are like one or two small short paragraphs. The basic story about her is that in that dynasty in Manipur, in Assam, in that kingdom, only one child is born in every generation. So that child becomes the heir and takes over the kingdom. But when Chitrangada was born, she was female. So therefore, it was difficult for her to take over the kingdom as a girl. So what her father did in that case was he declared her, he nominated her a putrika, which according to me only means that he said, okay, she is my heir. Even though she's a girl, she's my heir. So I will call her a putrika and I will train her as a putrika. She will be trained to take over the kingdom and in warrior arts and all of that. Right? So she became a warrior and she was to stay there and take over the kingdom after him. Right? Now, this has been mistranslated in a lot of ways. And I read some stories that um, irritated me a little because of the way they've mistranslated the whole thing. I mean, there are stories in which they say that she had to give up her warrior ways when she fell in love with Arjun, and she gave up being a warrior so that she could marry him and be his queen and all that. I don't think that would be the case at all. I see her as a warrior. Warrior ways are not easily given up. So I see her as a warrior who continued to be a warrior, but reached an agreement with Arjun. And this is where I feel that it was a very modern kind of view. Now, if you consider that kind of um, relationship, she knew that she was not going with her husband to his kingdom, whoever she was getting married to. She knew that from the start. She's going to stay in her kingdom and rule the kingdom, and her heir is going to rule, her son or daughter is going to rule after her. And Arjun knew that he was not going to stay with her. He knew that he was going to have to go back to Indraprastha, where war would be brewing at some point because they had been sent into exile. So he knew very well that he was required by his brothers in his kingdom and he would be returning. And both of them, knowing this, still had this lovely relationship, which I feel is a very nice relationship, right? I feel there was respect on both sides, and I like it, in which Arjun was able to respect her as a person, as a warrior, and she was able to respect him as the best warrior in the world. You know? And they had about 3 years together, after which Arjun returned to his kingdom. She remained in Manipur, and after her, her son took over. And Arjun returned to Manipur after many, many years. And at that time, I think her son was on the throne. So she had more or less retired. So when Arjun left again, he came for the Ashwamedha. And when he left again, she went with him. And she went back to Hastinapur. And they had a few happy years living there together. And then when the Pandavas left for the Himalayas, she returned to her kingdom. So that is the basic Chitrangada story, which I wrote because it spoke to me. I felt here is a very modern kind of relationship, and it's happening in Mahabharata time. And secondly, I was really annoyed because sometimes it was twisted too far. It became really too much because I heard some stories where they said that Chitrangada was a man because she was a warrior and she was, taught all the arts of looking after the kingdom. So she was a male, and then she had to become a female, and some nonsense like that. So I thought that was really quite absurd because in the original there's nothing like that is there, and I go by the original. India is too old. There are too many folklores and tales and popular culture, and if you can't even read all of that, leave alone pay attention to it. So not going by that at all. I thought I will write it up as a very um, modern story in which a strong woman meets a strong man and they get on and they do certain things for the kingdom. And then they decide, okay, let us have this conditional marriage. We will live together for 3 years and have a child, and then we'll see how it goes, which is what many modern couples do today also. And yet, this was done 3,000 years ago. So that's all I wanted to say about women in the ancient age and how they were seen and how I think they should be seen. Not like that at all. They were not victims. There are many examples, but too many to talk about.
Thank you,
Thank
ma'am,
you.
for that very valuable insight into some very notable Indian women of history. One of the questions that I had for you was
Mm.
about how you said that Sita was gentle, even though she was powerful, even though she was quiet, which of course we have a lot of evidence for that she was a very quiet lady. She
Yeah.
was very a person who thought very thoroughly before she spoke. However, people have always recorded her to being a warrior. She was somebody who was, even though she was a Brahman Putri, she did not just study Shastra, but she also studied Shastra. And moreover, there are so many dialogues between Ram and Sita within Ramayana, where they're having some very thorough arguments on their worldviews, on how, where she's almost borderline threatening him that if it doesn't go her way, then it's going to be a problem. And I think it's so nice to see a marriage between two strong-headed people and how they both navigate coexistence. So I just wanted to understand, by what accounts can we conclude that Sita was a gentle personality? Because
Yeah,
oftentimes
I
people
am.
say that she was a docile personality, and oftentimes we try to contest that. So I was just curious.
Look, there are about 300 Ramayans, so I guess this would depend on which Ramayana you go according to. I am going according to the original, which is the Valmiki Ramayana, which is the first epic poem in the world. And yes, in the Valmiki Ramayana, she had very open and very heartfelt conversations with Ram. But she was not one to go out there and speak to everybody. She didn't do that. She was generally pretty contained in her things. And she was known to be gentle and kind to everybody. Everyone looked up to her. And if she had something to say, she would say it quietly to Ram. She would not go out like Draupadi. I don't think she would have gone and shouted at the entire court. Right? So I don't see her as quiet. There might be other opinions on that. I have not read all the 300 Ramayana, so I don't know. I am going according to one Ramayana, which is the Valmiki Ramayana. And yes, she did have weapons training. It was said that she could herself lift that bow which Ram broke. But of course, she didn't actually pursue the weapons training as far as we know, um, because she settled down um, as a woman, right? As a wife and as a mother later on. So she didn't really pursue that weapons training, as far as I know. I could be wrong. Maybe there's some text in which she did pursue it, but I'm not aware of that. While it seems to me that Chitrangada did pursue it. Kaikeyi, her mother-in-law, Ram's stepmother, she was a warrior right through and through. She went to battle with Dashrath. So there were plenty of women warriors. If Sita had wanted to pursue it, I'm sure she could. It was not that there weren't any women around who were fighting.
Ma'am, how do you think the way in which Indian history and Indian literature encapsulates a female personality is different when compared with the rest of the world?
They're two things really. They don't have a strong female archetype anyway. There's no such thing. There's absolutely not. All women are victims. All women are helpless and at the mercy of men, which is not the case in India. We have extremely strong, Shakti is female. So we have extremely strong archetypes of women which have come down to us. I think most people have seen strong women in their lives. They would have seen strong mothers. My grandmother was a very strong woman. So, my mother also. So we've all seen strong women. That makes a big difference. When you have seen a strong woman, then you respect women. If you've never known that, if all the women in your life, which is the case with most foreign countries, because they have no strong women at all, they've never seen a strong woman, then they relate to women in a different way. And I'm talking about the men here. The men who have not seen strong women will not understand the strength of women. I don't think they would. It would be tougher for them. Maybe they could. Maybe if they're open enough and sensitive enough. But it would definitely be a tougher job for them to understand and respect a woman one on one. For Arjun, it was much easier to respect Chitrangada as an equal because his mother was Kunti. Kunti was a very tough woman. She had brought them up as a single mother. She had brought all five Pandavas up as a single mother in a situation where they were trying to kill them all. And they were roaming around in exile and all. She'd kept this family together and she'd brought them up. She's one of the toughest women around. And then Draupadi, herself, Draupadi by herself is a pretty tough cookie. So Arjun has seen tough women, so he understands that. He respects women. I don't think a man who has come from a system in which there's no strong woman would be able to appreciate this so much. So I think we have an advantage in India. We do not need to break the system. We already have our respect in the system. While abroad with all these feminist movements, they needed to break the system. They literally needed to break it because there was nothing for them. Here we didn't need to break it. We needed to expand it a little, broaden it a little bit for ourselves, which we did. But breaking it was not required.
Ma'am, according to you, what will Indic feminism do for India that global feminism cannot do for it? Because, like you said, in your journey of reading a lot of feminist books, it's almost impossible to apply those models as an Indian woman in our culture without having to abandon our identity as an Indian or as a Hindu altogether. If we agree to be just women, maybe it would be much easier to subscribe to global feminism. So, what exactly does Indic feminism bring to the table that makes it more useful for India?
Yeah, I don't see it as very different. It's the same as the difference between Hinduism and most of the monotheistic religions. A lot of the monotheistic religions are one against the other. Either you're with me or you're against me. And in Hinduism, all are in their place. Everyone has their own role. So in Hinduism also, women have a strong role. They stand up on their own feet. They don't have to be against anyone. I don't have to fight with men. That's not required for me. I can have a strong role and do my own thing. In in abroad, a lot of the feminist literature which I read a lot, it's very antagonistic. It's men against women. Women have to take a fighting stance to break through those male beliefs. And I don't think we have to do that. We don't have to break society because there's room for us already. We have a place. We just have to claim our place. We are required to claim it. We are required to go out and do things. Nobody will stop us. We've had women prime ministers. We have a woman president right now. We've got women in the armed forces. Um, we've got women in science. Where are women not? Women just have to claim it. We don't have to fight like that for it. There will be struggles, of course, because equality is not there anywhere in the world, even today. So there will be struggles, but I think we don't have to break anything to achieve it. We don't have to break the men. The men already understand to a large extent that women also have power and they also can stand on their own feet. Some men may not. Some women also may not. That's okay. That's part of life.
Ma'am, lastly, what I wish to ask of you is what do you think Sitaism would be? What is your personal interpretation of this term? And if there is any story of Sita that has stayed with you over the years of your academic journey and as well as your journey as a woman?
I think the main thing what I personally liked about Sita after reading the old text is that um, she had a center. She knew her center. She was not shifted from it. And the most horrific things have happened in her life. I mean, she's been kidnapped. She's been exiled. Maybe she's been exiled. I don't know if that's true. But she's been sent to the forest to live on, a very hard life in the midst of nothing. I'm sure they were starving a lot of the time. I'm sure they were sleeping under trees. So she's had a very tough life for somebody who was born in a very rich kingdom. She was born in the kingdom of Janak, which was a very rich kingdom. Her upbringing must have been in the utmost luxury. For somebody who has lived in the utmost luxury and then gone to Ayodhya, which is another rich kingdom, and there also she would have been treated like a princess and a queen. So for somebody living in the utmost luxury to adjust so beautifully to difficult times and to survive a most difficult situation, regardless of whether it's men threatening her or Rakshasas threatening her, and to come out of it at the end. And in the end, simply say, no, I don't want that. Sorry, I'm going home to my mother. Simple, soft, decisive. I like that. She's not fighting anything. She's not angry. She just decided this is it. This is how far I go. I think lots of women have to learn from it.
I think that was a beautiful conclusion to the talk, ma'am. Thank you very much to have graced our platform and shared the story of Chitrangada and the several women that make Indian history truly epic in the way that they are just simply real and that they are simply incredible. Thank you very much. We wish to have many such talks with you. Namaste.